Hi, this is Anne Marie from Teacher to Teacher Help. In this video, I'd like to share with you some ideas for helping your students when they absolutely can't think of anything to write about. So the title of this lesson is called Write About What You Know. And I'd like to share with you some picture books that I use to help facilitate this lesson. So how many times do you get that question? I can't think of anything, or the statement, I can't think of anything to write about. So one of my answers is, well, you need to do what professional authors do. They write about what they know. And I've read and studied so many mentor authors, and they all say the same thing. It all starts with your own background experiences, what you're interested in, what you already know a lot about. So I have 3 picture books that I'd like to share with you today that you can use to get this started in your own classroom. The first book is Arthur Writes a Story. So the premise behind Arthur Writes a Story is that at the beginning of the week, his teacher assigns the class to write a story. So he decides to write a story about how he got his puppy pal. Well, he goes home and he's reading the story that he's written to his sister DW, and she's like, does your story have to be real life? Because that story is boring, your life is boring. You should write your story about getting an elephant. So he switches course, he starts writing about an elephant, and then he interviews Buster and Brain, and they're giving him suggestions like, well, you should make your elephant go to the moon, and your topic should be well researched, you need to go to the library. At the end of the week, he has to stand up and share his story, and he has this wild, crazy song and dance story, and one of the students says, did that really happen? He ends up just orally telling the story of how he got his puppy pal. And what happens? His classmates, his teacher, love that story and say, well, that's the story that you should have written about. So I love sharing this with my students and then saying the moral to this story, the lesson that Arthur learned, is that it's important to write about what we know. That's what's going to resonate with our audience. And we always want to write for an audience because we have something to say and we want to communicate that to our audience. So starting with things that we know a lot about or that we have experienced ourselves will make the best stories, personal narratives. Okay, so you'll probably need several books to keep this lesson going because students will ask you that, say that again, over and over again. I can't think of anything to write about. Or maybe you just want a different book besides Arthur Writes a Story. So this one here, The Best Story by Eileen Spinelli, very similar premise. The little girl in the book, the main character, wants to write a story to enter it into a contest, the Best Story Ever contest. And she does similar things. She's trying to write this great story, but she's not writing from her own experience and knowledge base. And she talks to a bunch of different people. At the end, finally, her mom says, you need to write from what's in your heart, your own heart. And so she takes that advice and she ends up writing a great story. So again, the moral of the story, the lesson learned is write about what you know. The last book that I want to share with you is this one, Ralph Tells a Story. Ralph is in a writing workshop classroom and all of the students are writing, cranking out little booklets, and Ralph can't think of anything to write about. In fact, here's what all of his pages look like. You can see it's just him staring at blank paper with his pencil, and he can't get engaged in any topic. And over the course of the story, he learns a similar lesson that there are stories everywhere. We just need to mine our own lives. And so I love sharing this with students so that they can see we don't have to have these wild, crazy, fancy topics, just looking at our own lives. And I love the end of the book. He has some writing tips. So writing tips from Ralph. And then my favorite part is at the end where you can see he has now written tons and tons of books. And it's nice to look at the topics and see that it's just topics that come from his own life. So I love using this even as an inquiry study with students. Say, let's look at the topics that Ralph wrote about. Do any of these spark ideas that we can write about? Stories that come from our own lives. So I think one of the big steps in helping students find things to write about is to first help them see what they already know a lot about, and then model for them through these mentor texts or through our own writing how we can mine ideas from our own lives. So hopefully those tips and those book suggestions will be helpful to you as you support your students when they say, I can't think of anything to write about.